We're good to go. So in the interest of time, Eric, if you're okay, we should keep the agenda as is and continue the discussion. And then for those who are taking the Etherpad notes, Eric, you can come back and when we have at the last 5 minutes, if there's issues we can. Okay. Let's go.
For timing, when do you want me to talk about the message I sent to sort out use cases in architecture?
So Kathleen, I think it'll ebb and flow between both the use cases and the architecture draft.
Okay, so after use cases, I'll explain what I was thinking.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Milestones update. Kathleen, are you up for that?
Sure. We needed to get agreement to drop. So you don't have, do you have them on the next slide or no?
Don't have them on the next slide, actually.
Okay, so we had one that we were just going to drop, and then the architecture, we have to, I think this might be better at the end, right, to figure out when we can move the architecture milestone to. I think deciding now would be
That's
difficult.
Correct.
Okay.
The one that we could, where is it? I'm sorry.
So basically,
is it toke bind?
yes.
So if the working group agrees, we can drop that. We'll remove that as a milestone.
Is there any disagreement?
No.
Disagreement?
Okay, so we can confirm that, Kathleen, on the mail.
Yep. I'll send something out now.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so basically we need to shift all of the calls for adoption, and our hope was that we could do the call for adoption on the architecture, the Yang, and the interaction models, but as Kathleen said, we should put a placeholder for the last 5 minutes to see if we're ready to do that.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes. We're kind of over time here.
Yeah, we should keep moving.
Let's move forward. Yeah, so I guess we'll do use cases next then.
Yes.
Michael?
So do you have my slides? Can you project them?
Yeah.
Is that Ned typing or somebody else?
Somebody else?
Oh, sorry, that might have been me doing those. I'll mute. Sorry about that.
Oh, that keyboard. We're not seeing slides yet, Ned.
Okay, I think I have it here.
And if we're downloading the slides ourselves, there's 2 different copies. I assume we want the one that says fixed footer in the title?
Yeah, there's no material differences. It's the other one can get deleted.
I was trying to figure out, but in the interest of time, I just did a quick upload as opposed to, because Richard, when you submitted it as a new. So when I went to approve,
Oh,
I
is there an
couldn't-
update? Is there an update option now too?
Yeah,
To slides? I didn't
there
think
is.
so. I didn't
Yeah.
see that. I'm just happy that we can upload them. All right, so
So you're seeing stuff now, right?
we're seeing stuff now. Yeah, thank you. 05 got posted. I really wanted this posted last month, and I'm going to tell you that. You can go to the next slide if you like. I mean, we had a side meeting. Most of the people here on this call were there, and we had a lot of notes. But we went around in a lot of interesting circles, going back to the notes, I don't find a lot of concrete actions that I can put into play. We had a lot of conversation about different kind of levels of assurance between different things, and I found that very difficult in the end to get into the use cases because they weren't specific to specific things, and there wasn't clearly new use cases I needed to include. It's still a work in progress. I think there's some more pieces I can pull out of that, but a lot of it is kind of is a bit raw. Changes that are there, obviously included the teeth case, and I've put in some text from SP 800-155 on what are roots of trust, and I'm happy with that. I mean, we had a long conversation with about what does it mean, and I want to point to Rich Salt, who also, like me, didn't realize that roots of trust are not trust anchors. So that this word's root of trust is very niche, even among security people. Maybe worse among security people because it's confusing. So I'm not saying we're going to be able to change it, but I think that's something to think about going forward. And I think terms like this root of trust for update and root of trust for verification and stuff, I think that's compounding the situation, and I suggest avoiding it if you can. So I know it's hard to get people who are deep in a particular area to change terminology or not invent too many new ones, but I think this is going to bite us later on when it goes to wider IETF review. You're going to get questions. You're like, what? And you're like, well, no, it's not a trust anchor. It's a, oh yeah, right. Okay. So just something going forward. Maybe we need to hit them over the head with that. Next slide. Oh yeah. So I added some high-level text about passport checks and passport and background checks. I don't intend to keep the language, but there isn't any in the architecture document yet. So I just put something so that I have something to refer to. I don't really want to keep it there. That's not my goal. And the major work is, aside from a lot of little tweaks to a lot of little bits, including, for instance, TCG references now the these documents and a bunch of other things that people have suggested. What I've gone down through is, as I said in March, is put a template in. So the major edit I made to it since March is added the attestation type, passport, or background check, and I've gone through pretty much every use case that we had, except for some of the sub cases, and I put that in as best as I can. I think that you will disagree in some cases about things, and I think that's good. And there's some places I couldn't make a decision as to, for instance, what the attestation type was going to be. Can we have the next slide? So, what did I learn doing this? It was interesting. Okay, actually, of the use cases, for our background checks, 7 are passports, and 8 are to be determined. I don't know what they should be. And I observed that some things that people complained were, well, isn't this the same as this? And I observed that actually they differ by attestation type. And so that's one of the reasons I didn't want to deduplicate things too soon, is because I'm sure there's other things, that other attributes of use cases that are probably going to show up, and we're going to say, oh yes, that's 2 use cases because it differs in how you do things. And I hope that's a useful thing, and I hope this is really what I was going for at the beginning.
So I just want to make an observation here. This is Dave Taylor. I think out of the use cases, I think there might be 2 different categories of use cases here. Some of the use cases are really generic and don't try to specify the solution. And so like 5.4 and probably many of the ones that are black right now are probably in that category, because I think the passport versus background check is often a property of a solution to a use case. And so the other category is some of the use cases in here really are specific, solutions. And so, Android key store and a bunch of other things pointed to in the use case document are specific solutions. And each specific solution will either be background check or passport or hybrid or whatever. And so I think it is natural, the fact that you have some that are black or TBD and some that are not, and it has to do with whether it specifies a solution. So for example, in the confidential ML model, which is just the black one that I'm staring at right now, 5.4, there's going to be passport solutions and there's going to be background check solutions, and the general use case is agnostic.
Yes, you're absolutely right that on all points. So I would also suggest that if we can't decide, that means that the use case is probably not detailed enough. And you're really saying the same thing. We don't have enough information such that someone could actually put together a solution. And so it's probably indicative of we just don't understand that well enough. And that means it's not really informing our architecture or other things like that well enough. And I think that's something that we either need to go and find some people that are doing, in this case, confidential machine learning models, or we need to agree that, well, we might just not be able to solve that problem because we might not include something that someone needs or something like this. Or they're going to have a custom extension, or I don't know, whatever, something like that is going to happen.
We could just create a category where we have ones that are known but not as well defined, and so then we just don't go into the details and they could be defined later.
Yeah, I wonder if we can have like use cases and, I don't know, uses or something. So like even the 5.3 TP working group use case, right? In the slides that I presented in the previous Interim meeting, it was clear that there was a use case, which was, how do I integrate attestation with remediation? And then there was a specific proposal on a solution where we said, this is the one that probably makes the most sense for TEEP, right? And so that was a particular way to use it with Open Trust Protocol. So that was a particular maybe use. I'm just trying to invent a term here. And so maybe there's distinctions between use cases and specific uses.
So this is Lawrence Lundblade. I agreed with everything Dave said in his first set of comments. It doesn't seem that critical to me to sort them into background versus passport. Seems like that could, for a given sort of use case, that it could vary based on business model or something like that. This doesn't seem like a critical sorting criteria to me. It seems like we should be accommodating both in most of our work for both.
Right. This is Eric Voigt. I think passport and background check are probably my favorite part of this use case, because I'm looking at the interaction models between network elements, and the interaction models are very much determined based on the protocols that are choosing how to extract the information. So I'm really a fan of this breakdown.
Yeah, this is Dave Taylor. I was going to say that I think one of the main values of background check versus passport in this type of taxonomy is, I think whether it's background check or passport helps to make it easy to understand why some people are looking at trying to standardize evidence and other people are looking at trying to standardize the attestation results.
Exactly. And I don't think that, to address Lawrence, I don't think we're trying to separate them out in order to cross some of them off, if that's what you're suggesting. Are you?
It just seems like we want to be flexible and accommodating of both models sort of all the time. And most I mean, a lot of our standards activity is around the definition of the token, and the token should be neutral to the claims, the EAT, all that should be neutral to whether it's background or passport.
Yeah, this is Hank. I agree with Lawrence with this. The use cases here are not a finite list. They're a good sample of what is done and not taking into account other applications. So the each being neutral and accommodating most of this without respect of background and passport seems to be a good way to move.
Yeah, so I agree, and I think the distinguishing factor here would be how, assuming we're using the Open Trust Protocol from the TEEP working group, how you apply those, right? So what does the architecture look like, with the background check or the passport?
So the vision here also is for EATs is that they get stuffed into all sorts of other protocols, into extensions and TLS, into HTTP headers, into HTTP bodies. So yep. the whole use case could just be, it could be driven by how the EATs are getting stuffed into some other protocol and totally out of control or anything like that.
So, but at no point is there proposal to have only background checks or only passports. That's what I'm hearing from you, Lawrence, is that we're going to somehow do one or the other. Is that more complicated?
Want some more time on this, or I'm just wondering, we're running out of time for.
That's it. That's the discussion. But this is discussion, and there's no other slides anyway.
So I do think it's important, and this kind of gets at my message I sent to the list. So after reading this recent document, Michael, I think you did a really nice job. It's very readable, very easy to understand. I think if you were to spell out and have a picture of what background check looks like and passport, how this connects to the Open Trust Protocol and the TEEP working group, and then do additional things like what you did in pointing out the flow, the flow work from Jessica and was it Gus, and it would look more like other architecture documents that have been well received by the IESG, in that it provides a map of how things are all connected, and I think this could do a really good job of that. The language is very accessible. You don't need to invest in a whole new set of language like you do with the architecture document. So I think this could actually make a better, more reachable architecture document to have higher deployment and more people adopting it. So I think we'd get a better adoption rate with that kind of structure.
So this is Dave. I think the way that I'm interpreting what you said, Kathleen, is that the framing here in the use cases motivates other things. Not that this is sufficient, but they would need to add to this the discussion of the roles, some of which is in the current architecture document, and then how those relate to one or more use cases to cover the space, like how it relates to a background check deployment in, say, the Open Trust Protocol, how it relates to a passport and maybe one of the passport use cases and so on. Am I summarizing your thinking correctly? Because that makes sense to me.
Yes. However, I like the language choices Michael has used so far. And so, like, even when I read the roles section, if I'm having trouble and having to reread things a few times, and I have read thousands of, now RFCs, please make it more reachable. So I really appreciate the language choices Michael has made in this. Like, I don't want people to have to learn an entire new language set to adopt this. I know that's common with some protocols, but I don't think it's necessary. This should be pretty simple, right? You use EATs in lots of different ways, and you validate them, and you move on your merry way. You make this something that we can use as a standard, and EATs could be integrated everywhere so that we don't have companies coming up with their own solutions, which they already have and are continuing to do, right? So time is important. So I think we can get something like this document out faster and more done. And I think we'd have less arguments over it.
So I agree that the use case document was easier for me to read than the architecture draft proposal was harder for me to read. So I agree with that. If you want to go in this direction, as the person that put together the background and passport slides and so on, I am happy to help with this if you'd like. Meaning if you'd like to have stuff added into here that is a bunch of new text, I am happy to help with that.
And I know I just dropped a bomb, right? So I'd love to hear other thoughts, or if people haven't read the use case document, that they read it and think about it in this way and they think towards adoption. Part of the CARIS workshop that we did a few months back, we looked at what protocols were adopted and what were not. There's a clear industry demand for this, and that was one of the main factors, but the understandability is another one.
I think that what I think we need to do is for Hank and I to work together, and I'd like to come back to the working group with some thoughts about that.
And maybe incorporate.
Sorry.
Come back to the working group. Just let us think about the work involved and come back to you. Okay.
So I'm not saying necessarily to combine everything. That's not what I'm proposing. I'd like to lead with this and add in the text that Dave is talking about on background and passport, and emphasize the flexibility of EATS, and just not make this overcomplicated.
Okay, so let me put another option out here, Kathleen. What I'm getting, and there was agreement from Dave, is, and I've only gotten a chance to skim through both drafts, is that this draft is far more readable than the architecture, and you like the language. However, what I'm hearing is it's not quite the architecture that we're looking for. So the other option I would like to propose is that we adopt the language and terminology that's in this draft and ensure that the architecture is consistent with that.
Oh, I don't see any architecture in my document. I don't know what you'd implement. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm agreeing with that, Michael. I'm just.
Yeah, you should take a look at both documents. It's kind of hard to do that. And Michael, I think we can make yours more architecture-like, which, Dave seems to agree just by adding in the background check and passport. And then you're getting into the relationship with the Open Trust Protocol and things like that. And then we do have more of an architecture, and then explicitly express the flexibility for each.
Okay, we're running out of time on this one. Ned, you're our timekeeper. I haven't been keeping track, so I think.
Yeah, we're in the middle of the architecture draft section.
Yeah. Okay. So let's give Hank time. Kathleen, we absolutely need to continue this discussion, and it flows into the architecture draft. But I'd like to give Hank time to provide his view on the architecture and the content and updates to that draft so that we can continue this discussion. Is that okay? No objections? Okay. Let's have Hank move to the architecture so that we can continue on this and potentially other things that arise.
Okay, can you share the slides are uploaded, or do I have to try to present?
I don't see them on the meeting materials yet.
I don't see them on meeting materials.
Yeah, nobody approved them yet.
I didn't see them. That's why I didn't approve them. Sorry, Hank.
Oh, they're there. Okay. Maybe the
I will look for the
did.
approval. Yeah, I checked 5 minutes before the meeting, so.
Huh. Yeah, well, my tracker says waiting for approval, so maybe that didn't work. I don't know. I can try to present myself because being prepared is helpful. Let me find my slides in my application list, and then we can go from there, I hope. There they are. Okay. Have to go back. So am I sharing correctly?
Yep, let's see.
Okay, so let's see. Having prepared something is good. So yeah, I don't know how much relevance in the context of Kasim proposal the slide deck has, but let's go through it first. So we did apparently a major refactoring. We only have two major types that are architectural constituents now, that are roles and principles, and the messages between them. Principles are basically the bucket you can put roles in, and those communicate with each other. So this is more than the background check and the passport model. It allows for literally every kind of combination and message exchange, including proxying a lot of stuff, relaying it, vetting it in parallel, and yada yada. So it also enables us to avoid specification text about roots of trust and trust anchors, because we just introduced a very important, I think, concept that is separating the internals of the attester role. There's something in there that creates the EAT, for example, and something that is attested, for example, coordinates. There's always a simple go-to example that has geographic coordinates in them, and that is the attested computational environment. These are separate and nothing more. We don't provide any more information here intentionally, because separate could, at the very minimal, be file system permissions in the same computing context, for example. So there is a lot of flexibility to this approach, we think. There were a lot of contributions to this. I think over 20 people now contributed to this model over the last year, and it resulted in a simplification of terminology, like a lot. We are down to 4 roles and 5 message types. And consulting with Michael and the use cases, parsing them a lot of times and putting them through all the solution creators, including, I hope, Fido and EAT, which is sometimes a little bit hard to get a feedback from. This maps to all of them. So at the moment, some use cases only differentiate themselves between each other by a different composition of roles and not workflows. And that is accommodated by the current architecture text, basically the 4 roles and 5 messages. So that maps to TEEP. Apparently, Dave got it, and he was able to map it. It apparently maps to Fido, unless Lawrence objects to this. And it is mapping the complete space of TCG, TPM-based attestation and TEE-based attestation evidence. So that's nice. Therefore, we have, there's a case of DYO, I see here. So it should be able to map EAT, the Open Trust Platform protocol version 2. That might be TEEP version 1 at some point. It most certainly maps the RIF case. It maps Chara, which I will come to later, and all the Yang realm content and RPCs we have created already, and that are already progressing.
Yeah,
Gary
here. This is Gary here. I don't believe it does map to Fido. I cited the example yesterday of the Android safety net attestation, where the attested and the attested computing environment and the attester are one and the same. So it's not. I mean, if that's the goal of this document, then we need to make sure that at least the terminology that's been defined is actually consistent.
Yes.
Of course, it doesn't have to be the goal of the document either. It could be that, okay, we view things such as Android safety net as being outside of scope.
Yeah, I read the safety net. I put a mail to the list. So safety net itself says it is not an attestation. So that's kind of a contradiction I was not able to resolve. It just says it's a claim set and please use KeyStore to make this attestation. It's literally in the description of SafetyNet. So I was a little bit, I didn't know how to deal with that. So I need more input about that. And we as a group most certainly need to understand this better. But at the moment, SafetyNet seems to be the claim set and the attestation seems to be based on the KeyStore element of this. That is my 10-mile high overview. And most certainly proposals of texts are the only way to remediate this because I don't know how to phrase it better. And so if there's disparity and if separate on a file system permission level is not enough, then I don't know what is enough. So we have to resolve it on the list.
Yeah, it's a matter of clarifying the scope of the document, right? Because I view SafetyNet as you know, a little bit more sophisticated form of self-attestation. And even FIDO has this concept of self-attestation, which is basically self-signing. A lot of security experts I've heard find that absolutely worthless from a security perspective, but it's there. So I think that's what I'm saying. Are we going to cover cases that maybe do not add sufficient security value, or are we going to cover everything that you see in in specifications like FIDO?
So I think this is the question that was asked is, does the architecture cover the scenario where the attested environment is the same as the attesting environment? And it does, because we have the ability to distinguish the two. We can always say that in some implementations, those two environments are combined, one and the same, and that there are security issues associated with combining them. That seems like that fits into this overall point that the architecture we have is able to describe even the FIDO case.
And
yeah, in theory,
this is not one architecture to rule everything to become the same case. This is a set of tools to put together that are used to solve specific, well, actually use cases in the different communities. So not every component of the architecture necessarily is used by everybody.
Yes, indeed. It is a composability here. You can leave out roles. You can even collapse the attesting and attested environment if you really need to. The architecture does not spell that out. It says separate. But we can highlight, if you don't separate them, you have a security issue. But still, you have to have this level of assurance. You have to highlight that at some point. So if you're highlighting it, it's okay. If you're not highlighting it, it's kind of fishy.
So time-wise, we're at 8:13. We're past the architecture draft time slot, and we're running into the interaction model time slot. But you can use the time how you prefer. I think.
I need less time for the subsequent presentations, anticipating that we will run over time, of course. So according to all the input that is in parallel to Kathleen's latest suggestion or proposal is that we move all the terms up to provide a better overview and then immediately start to relate all the terms to make a better relationship between all these terms. That is basically what the use cases are, I think, as I think Michael would agree with this. Please just drop in a no if this is not true. So we try to abstract the use cases and the roles there, and therefore we have a very limited set of terms now, which are 9. And you can combine them in any case you want, and you can leave a lot of them out in your workflow solution. And you even collapse the attesting and attested stuff. But it's not spelled out, but certainly possible, with the exception, again, you have to highlight that you're not being separate if you do this. Otherwise, it is not valid evidence, and you cannot put trustworthiness properties on it. Again, this is complemented with diagrams because this should go up in the architecture to reduce the learning curve that we are encountering today. There's another discussion about standard or informational that does not have to be here. I think we can skip it for the sake of time. I just wanted to highlight the architecture does not have to be standard track if it is possible to formulate requirements on the solutions that are like an attester must be able to create attestation evidence, and attestation evidence has certain qualities. For example, the attesting and attested environment are not separate. That is a very important quality to the evidence. That is very important to the post processes. If you don't know that, you cannot trust that and put no trustworthiness into this. If you do express that, for example, with EAT claims, you're golden. If you do not, it is impossible to distinguish evidence that is trustworthy from one that might have, so to speak, security issues, as I heard from Gary. But that's okay. And that is the only prescriptiveness that the architecture should do ever, and nothing more. And as I heard, we have to go back to the AD probably to let that be confirmed, because I don't really know how BCP 14 terminology in an informational document works actually. And I have not met yet one individual that could explain that to me like in a nutshell. And so this might be a topic. Moving on. So questions for the architecture and the 9 concepts, which are 4 roles and 5 message types that are basically derived from the use cases. Is this not clear enough?
Does it make sense for the use cases to be described using these terms?
Yes, it would make a lot of sense, but then they would not be use cases anymore, but scenario descriptions, like usage scenarios. Use cases are intended to be not using the terminology of the actual solution because they are only a story. Then you map them to the unifying part that is the architecture. So if you're going with usage scenarios here, you can use that terminology already. But I think that's not the definition of a use case anymore. But that's only me. We can bring this to the list. I don't know.
Right. The intention of the architecture and the use cases is to be able, one informs the other, and it helps get people using common terminology. So I'm wondering if it makes sense for there to be a usage scenarios section somewhere.
So this is Kathleen. I'm just going to disagree with Hank that we need to have a completely new defined set of terminology that is confusing and hard to reach, and that makes it an architecture. So I don't agree with that. I think you can define an architecture and allow it to be reachable. And, I'm just picturing it going off. If Dave Thaler and I both have had trouble reading the document, a lot of other people will. We have both read a significant number of documents. I don't know.
Let me highlight, it is not finished yet. All the composition, for example, that Dave is proposing are not in there yet. We pulled them all out to boil it down to a nucleus that we can start again with. So it is probably not matching all the use cases at the moment because we pulled that out to give you the pure essence that was refined from the use cases. Mapping them back to them is, of course, an important task of the architecture. So I don't know where to start. If we want to do that with the use case document, I'm not really convinced because they are basically evolving to user scenarios, and the architecture itself most certainly needs better mapping to use cases. So maybe both documents merge, and that I think is what Michael was highlighting or like indicating. Please again stop me if I'm saying something wrong here, Michael. And readability of something that is actually complicated and not simple is a little bit of a learning curve. I agree with that. And,
I think it's been made overly complicated, though. I don't think it has to be as hard as it is. And personally, what I would like to see is, if Dave is willing to make the additions to the use case document to see if that could be a more reachable architecture document with the suggestions. So, and then we can compare the two.
We should do one step after the other, and first of all, discuss the initial proposal on the list and see how.
I put it out there. Yep.
Yeah, but there was no chance to react to this, I think. So maybe we keep that as a actual proposal going on and see how this works. And if there is enough agreement, we can mold the use cases and derive terminology from them and do the architecture there. That is, I think that the end result would look quite similar, but it's a different approach. I agree with that.
Well, one is to simplify the language by not introducing too much. So, Dave, are you willing to give that a try, and then we can look at the two documents as architecture documents and see which would go forward?
If you'd like me to do that, yes, because I have to, because none of the documents other than the text that Michael mentioned that he added in that he did not expect to be in the use case. I do want to write some text about background check and passport, especially as it relates to TEEP. And I guess Michael has a little bit of that. But yet, the short answer is yes, because I was hoping to write some text anyway.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, something to look at is always better, I think, and so you can compare it. Moving on, interaction model. In this case, is progressing. We adapted maybe, I don't know how valid this is now, the architecture terminology. We are not through the whole document yet, but a major chunk of it is now aligned. And we have running code for the interaction model, which is basically a CoAP CWORD CDL-based implementation that is viable to be integrated in firmware and can run out of the box. It is there and you can test it all the time. It's literally using the architecture terminology and the interaction model described in the apparently interaction model draft. It's BSD3, so everybody is at the leisure to use it. And if you do not have any requirements in hardware, we provide simulators and emulators in a Docker version to test this live on any box you have. There's an interesting benefit to this because you have a hands-on feeling how this works. I don't know today if OLTP version 2 is capable of relaying all the information we need. And most certainly, it is perceived as a chip vendor protocol that is not necessarily used in all the domains beyond that. If we can make that work, that's nice. I'm not sure if we, because we want to have an inclusion here and basically being a convergence point of multiple realms, SDOs, and solutions, if that works out at the end. But I like to be convinced otherwise because I really want to see this work at the end.
Can you comment on how interaction model relates to Android Key Store and FIDO and other use cases? I mean, my understanding is interaction model is supposed to be a general thing, so we need to, I mean, need to relate to the big use cases like Android Key Store.
Interaction models are the edges between roles where messages are effectively relayed. So each comes into this picture as a message. And the interaction model is basically highlighting how these messages are queried, maybe even pushed if you use time-based or other approaches, which is the next slide, because there will be more than one model, we realized. We are starting with a challenge response nonce one. That's often probably most used model, but it's rather underspecified because there is never a reference document you can point to, like we are doing it this way, so we just build it here. But there are flavors of this, like the direct anonymous attestation. There is also the ephemeral key dice attestation approach, and there is a unidirectional time-based approach that are not covered in the interaction model document yet. So with respect to FIDO, you can choose any interaction you want. It can be a challenge response, it can be just a push, it can be a ephemeral key store, it can be an effective key store, it can be certificate-based, or it can not be certificate-based in the case of DAA. There are a lot of flavors here that would allow you to compose the workflow and re-establish or map the workflow FIDO.
But one would expect that the interaction model would be able to implement the I don't know what we're calling them, but basically the passport model and the background check model. Those are stylized interactions that apparently apply to lots of use cases. So it seems like the interaction model ought to be focusing on those stereotypical interactions, given that we can see that there's a mapping to the use cases.
Exactly. That's why the list advanced. We were only annoyed that there was no challenge response reference interaction model, but now we realize there are a lot of flavors here that are not all covered in the use case document yet, that are also used today in production, and we cannot just leave them out. And some of them most certainly do not map to OGRP, unfortunately.
Hey, this is Gary here. Mind if I interject? But I mean, this is, I think, I like reading the interaction model. It's informative. I understand it, but this is actually an example, in my opinion, of where we get into trouble when we try to actually be prescriptive on terminology. Assertion as it's defined here is not the same as an assertion defined in the FIDO context, because an assertion can only be generated almost always after a user verification operation has been performed, because it's authenticator specific.
Yeah, they're not using assertions at all anymore. We mapped to that because we're using claims now.
Well, looking at
a FIDO assertion is definitely a different thing, and we just have to keep those terminologies separately. They're just two different. That's the same word for different things, and we're not going to resolve that one.
We're not going to resolve it, and that's why it shouldn't even be. We shouldn't even talk about normative terminology. We should just say this is in this context. That's it, and otherwise you're going to get right into these issues. What's being defined as an assertion in the context of interaction is very in this document is very different than what FIDO defines as an assertion. And even though the call flows could actually look very similar.
So back to the I think the interaction model should have examples from Android Attestation in particular, because that's probably easier to figure out and documented, and APIs are there. You can actually do implementations with it, and I mean, I would like to see line items that say this is how it describes Android Attestation.
If an expert in Android Attestation would be able to provide the interaction model that is being conducted and how it differs from the others, that would be awesome, because then we have a relatively complete list
he's on the list. The guy who manages the whole thing is on the list.
Sorry?
I mean, I would be willing to do it but I just have too much other work to do. Android Attestation is documented. There are public documents and APIs. They're probably a lot easier to read than the FIDO stuff.
But I'm saying the guy that wrote the documentation is on our mailing list.
Oh, I know.
Has posted about it.
I know, but he doesn't.
Yeah, so I think he will.
So just to context, we're in the middle of the Yang module draft time slot now.
That is good, because that is only one slide, no problem. So I know that people shy away from using a complicated set of terminology. Again, this is 9 terms, and try to map them to existing solutions. But what I hear in this call right now is a strong focus on FIDO, and we try to be inclusive, and Android key store and the safety net version. Although safety net is, as you just said, just a claim set and not evidence.
No, there's the core Android model. It's not safety net. That's the one that's really the Android key store. That's really the one that probably is the most general and broad, that really should be most looked at. And it's accessible.
And then using that, if it diverges from a interaction model you can find, we need a contributor that really spells that out. Just saying it is defined somewhere else is not creating a conversion point here. It just creates separate solutions that are not interoperable anymore. So the conversion point has to be retained, I think. Otherwise, we will basically abandon the advantage of having interoperability. That's everything basically I'm saying here. We can have separate solutions that works in their own domain. That is okay. And we can hope for adoption, or we can include existing solutions. That's basically the idea of the interaction model draft, and which is just a longer arm of the architecture actually. Moving on, the Yang module will only be a status update. So there have been 2 reviews, which is very nice, but not enough. So I think the lower limit was like 3 reviews, and I think until the next IETF meeting we will get another review. That should be possible. What I can report is that there is actually multiple prototyping efforts in production environments already, and they are progressing fast. The output will be more complicated role compositions than passport or background check, but they will always somehow be related to those. That is true. But calling them just hybrid would not be enough. And I'm reluctant to go into composite device definition because that's kind of easy. My only question is, does the use case document cover them, aka does the architecture document cover them? Because those 2 will converge. That was the plan originally also. And I'm not sure if it's valid or useful or beneficial to introduce the idea that a tester is a composite device and that there are multiple things that can be attested to by multiple, let's call them principles again, because that's why the REST architecture is flexible, that could attest for some of these subcomponents and composite devices. I'm not sure if it's relevant to the architecture. Probably it would be over engineering, maybe, but the notion was raised, so I'm raising it here. That was the only thing I was not sure about, because that's an item. Otherwise, the Yang module needs more text. We are aware of that. Also, reviews show us, yes, they need more text. And it will be provided by other contributors than me, and it is in the queue. So this will be done until the next meeting also. And then the Yang module will have a relatively stable state that is according to already adopted terminology. I'm sorry to say this, but the role terminology, for example, as a nucleus already is infused in other SDOs and the solutions that are created in prototyping at the same point of time. And that's basically me. So I hope I did some racing here for you to have more time for the rest.
So on your last question, this is Dave Thaler. I think the working group did have previous discussion. I'm thinking it was the last face-to-face meeting about different types of compositions of claim sets, whether there was nesting or chaining or whatever. And I think for that discussion, which of course may be in the EAT document or whatever, I think that does have some does warrant some architectural discussion to motivate why that's interesting. So in other words, is there benefit to introduce the concept of, I don't know if composite devices is the right word, but I think there is a benefit to introducing whatever is necessary to understand the use case for having more complex arrangements of whether it's EATs or claim sets or whatever term that you want to use. I think there is some impact on the architecture document to motivate that. I have to think about what the right way to describe that is, but I do think that there is a benefit to introduce something there, and I have to think about that.
Okay. Hi, this is Eric. I'm back. There's a couple things that I think would give you examples of that, and they were hit on the use case document. We have multiple TPM equivalent chips in our platforms, and how do you get a unified set of claims from different chips pushed out? And these are mostly TPM2 types rather than EAP types. Passport attestation, as well as key provisioning, and especially for virtual and physical. How do you handle the assembly of virtual and physical attestation going off device? So there's a lot of cases where we need to do assemblies for more complex network elements, and these are not really using the EAT stuff. These are using the the normal stuff that would come off of TPM2, and this is today's stuff that we're doing.
Yeah, agree.
So I was going to ask kind of how we see this Yang document relating to the EAT document. I mean, my understanding is Yang is basically documenting the claims that exist today in TPM chips that can't really be changed. And EAT is defining a different way of doing claims. And almost seems like a bit of ships in the night. Not really sure how to relate them.
Well, our approach was to use the architecture for this, so you can always map them to the 4 and 5 columns.
Claim X in EAT is the same as claim Y in Yang interaction. That architecture is not going to do that.
I have a difficult time. If you could use the information model you're proposing there, that would be possible, but they're most certainly not the same implementation or solution, unfortunately.
I mean, if they really are ships in the night, and that's fine. I mean, and we agree that we can't ever make them connect up. Then okay, that's it.
Again, the actual role
is this for humans to understand?
So I think in terms of time, we're gonna go into the next section, which is a discussion on information model. It seems like we're going in that direction anyway. So.
And for that discussion, if we're going to take it to the list, if Dave or some representative from the TEEP working group might be able to chime in, since we do have TEE vendors working in that forum who have agreed to split out attestation to routes. Do they plan to use this or not, right? So those would be really good questions to understand. So having some interaction from the TEEP working group might be good on those questions.
Right. So
I understand that not all TE work is done in, I mean, there's a lot of TE work that is not related to TEEP.
So what we determined was that the TEEP working group believed that they had a set of claims that they wanted to define that was within their scope. There's the set of claims that are in the EAT draft. There's presumably a set of claims that are in the Yang model draft as well. I think that sort of suggests that the way forward in terms of information model is that there can be multiple drafts that capture both the information model and then some sort of binding to using a data modeling language, but that it should be clear in the draft what the claims are expressed at an information model level of abstraction, so that somebody reading the drafts could be able to compare them and understand what the semantics are, and if there are overlapping semantics, I think that would be a case where we would want, the RATS working group would want to look at them and say, does it make sense to have different drafts that are defining the same semantics, but that differ in terms of their data model? Maybe we can work to simplify so that we're not defining the same thing differently in multiple cases. That was one of the concerns that we had going into the discussion at the last face-to-face. Should we have a single information model document? And the feedback was on the list and other places was, no, that probably doesn't make sense. But we should at least have some best known methods for expressing what the claims are in the different drafts so that they are easily compared and understood, at least at a semantic level.
The only thing we should avoid is ships in the night. If we diverge and cannot compare anymore, the solutions are literally separate. And I think that is the most important thing we want to try to avoid.
Maybe it's possible, maybe it's not.
So is there an action item for the Yang module draft to create a section that says here's the information model and these are the claims?
Yeah, I was asking a lot of each question lately, and that was going into the direction of using an information model for the Yang module here. I think it might be possible. It also anticipates
let me
future
add something there.
because, yeah, okay, sorry.
There doesn't have to be one Yang module. There's plenty of groups that have multiple Yang modules. A lot of carriers, a lot of vendors who are on the draft really are hoping just for the basic TPM interactions with TPM 1.1 and 1.2 to standardize. I wouldn't necessarily force it into a single Yang module. In fact, I'm hoping that we still just can adopt the current module because it accomplishes something very necessary for getting information to and from TPM 1.2 and 2.0 devices with just getting vendor interoperability for things that are on the ground. So I think even with these longer term issues, there's no reason that this would preclude just adopting a model which lets us have a common view of those older equipment types.
I would like to hear what Lawrence's opinion is on how to go about this from his previous statements. Is it an update to this? Is it a separate document?
Sure, I really have that much of an opinion at this point. Seems like the claim set for TPMs is kind of fixed. You can't really do much with it, right? So
one thing we can do, I mean, the idea, even though the claim set's fixed, the Yang model has a lot of other stuff for RPC elements and elements going back and forth. So even if it's fixed, there is quite a number of Yang models that could be exposing the same information from different vendors. Just nailing down that is a reasonable amount of work and useful in of itself, even with the fixed elements out of that TPM. The interaction model supported by the router can be very different. You might want to read stuff from the current chip. You might want to do an RPC to pull information out. So there's still plenty of work in just nailing down the current.
Right, and that's like all. So in the like Android attestation world, we don't specify any of that stuff. I don't care about that stuff because it's all application specific, all run in HTTP transactions and headers, and it's like your banking app has got an interaction model, and your United Airlines app has an interaction model, and all of that stuff is just, we don't care about any of that. All we just care about is defining the claim format and letting those apps, those Android apps, interact however they want, all over the place. So that's kind of the view from that world. You're in the router world. I mean, it sounds like you're really talking about building the whole very fine-grained, detailed conveyance protocol parts for TPMs in routers. So, like I said, maybe these really are ships in the night, and but I think maybe there's a vision here. I mean, I can't really speak for it myself because I'm not that, but TPMs are limited in what they can do now. Maybe we move to something that's a lot more powerful than TPMs in terms of ability to express claims, and that's where we would want to look at how the claims that are in TPMs today relate to how the claims that are being defined for EAT. I mean, that would be my interest in all of this. The sort of RPC back and forth interaction model, that seems like that should be factored out, and that's kind of that's a conveyance protocol for claims or for tokens for TPMs for routers. That's kind of a specific thing, and maybe maybe these are ships in the night, except for trying to understand how the claims could be similar, so there's a transition plan from TPM-based claims to EAT-based claims.
I see what you're saying. There certainly is a need now for the vendors who want to talk to and from TPMs to have a transport model mapped, which is why what the Yang model came from. I mean, the Yang model started in the vendor community for routers, and we want to have a common one across the routers. That's why I came to this group. I think that others might also want that. It seems pretty straightforward, honestly.
Yeah, I could see that.
So the term ships in the night, is this essentially referring to the fact that different, the different applications of a technology don't necessarily have to interoperate, and therefore maybe to try and create standards that expect interoperability where none is really expected?
Point is they can't fire cannons
I
on
think.
each other. They can't see each other.
Oh, sorry, Michael, were you speaking?
Michael, you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Okay. So in any case.
Yeah, I changed headsets and it didn't work.
I think the two major ships we're talking about in a way are kind of TPM-based claims and EAT-based claims.
In theory, an EAT-based claim is supposed to be independent of a root of trust, and there's nothing that prevents a TPM or some other component that would assert itself as a root of trust to implementing an EAT claim. I think the reality is that because there's such a large installed base of a particular type of root of trust, that changing an installed base has challenges. You can't just change over an installed base. It doesn't mean that couldn't change in the future, given that there's some clear standards for defining the different claims that are useful and can be interoperable.
Well, for a TPM to be able to create some of the claims that are defined in EAT would require new hardware definitions. That's
Not only that, it requires the signature to be able to apply it to the claim set.
Yeah.
Because this is a trustworthy function on the system. There's no signing fool allowed here. Maybe it is because we are allowing a tested environment to collapse, but still, that should be indicated as a level of assurance. And if we do so, it has to highlight that not every hardware system can sign arbitrary data, that some evidence is bound to the functions that they are deployed with today. And in an ideal world, everything would be able to create EATs and sign them, but that's just not the case. And also, EATs are not always transported in the same interaction model. That's a fact. And so if you're not taking this into account, you're creating a domain-specific solution for Android.
Okay, so I have, I guess, two questions then. One is from the TEEP working group, we have hardware vendors working together there with their starting point as the Open Trust Protocol. They have handed off the attestation piece for us within that protocol, knowing that hardware would have to be updated. Is this something that they're planning on?
I don't think it's correct to say that the hardware needs to be updated. I think it can be done just as a pure software operation.
Yeah, TEE hardware.
This is the TEE, not the TPM, yeah.
Right, the only thing that you need to be clear, the only thing that you need the hardware to be updated for is if the hardware provides some of the information that goes in the evidence. Okay. Now, the thing that the relying party consumes, right, which is the TAM and the TEEP case, the thing that the relying party consumes is the attestation result. What goes in the attestation result, they have no impact whatsoever. What the hardware says in the evidence may have no may or may not have any direct impact on the literal content of the attestation result, right? That depends on what you define the attestation result to contain. That's what the TAM actually consumes.
Okay, great. So then that's possible. And then the other use case on, well, I guess there's lots of use cases. So then the other piece where you're talking about systems and where interoperability might be important, one thing that I personally think is very important is the supply chain where you have software modules able to provide an attestation on, what they expect the code to look like so that it could be verified. Now, if organizations are doing that on a global basis, they have to, do this verification, and if it's all done similarly, then they can have a level of assurance on their running software. But if it's done with all different types of claims, then we're in trouble, right? The security industry is a mess as it is. I think we could use this as an opportunity if this gets adopted with a single format to sort that for the supply chain use case.
With format, do you mean data model, like the wire format, or do you mean like the semantics of the thing?
Both.
I mean, ultimately both, but you need the on-the-wire format to be understood for interoperability.
Yeah, and if you were going to collect those all into, let's say, a repository and do your analysis, having it consistent is really important. This is why we have a problem with SACM and print standards. It's too difficult, and there's different ways to do it depending on the operating system, and it's got to be managed separately, right? So creating something that can be managed within a normal IT management system for the enterprise, like if this was added into some type of configuration management system as an expected piece and not like some special security service, then we'll be doing the enterprises a favor in terms of being able to provide a level of assurance of systems that they know what they expect to see in a consistent way.
Yeah, and this is really the reason why I wanted to see EAT standardized. I mean, that's the core work. Yes, I totally agree.
So,
thank you, Lawrence, for all your work.
Yeah, so to summarize, it seems like what we're saying is could be value in having an industry standard representation for the information that a manufacturer produces, what the architecture would call endorsements. That was out of scope for this group initially. I'm not sure how we want to sort of disposition the conversation, given that it seems like we're running into a topic that's out of scope.
So
I didn't think it was out of scope.
Yeah, so I didn't either. And if EAT is defined to do that specifically, then it'd be kind of silly to put that out of scope.
Yeah, you can of course create endorsement
is very important.
Yeah, I think endorsement documents are possible to be created with EAT, and if they are separate from the point to create evidence, that is easier actually. And that would go down into the realm of concise identities or other CWT formats that are already existing, and some are stuck in ISG at some time.
Well, I don't know that we need to make it so complicated. As Lawrence said, EAT was designed for that purpose. So I think, if the use case document we're able to spell out how that happens, I think we might be fine.
I'm not sure if we can have adoption of EAT as the sole endorsement document. Again, it's evidence and not that actually, but you can use it for the format you can use for that. I'm agreeing with that. There has to be a lot of other existing things for like 20 years to be taken into account, and just cutting that off hard will not ease adoption. It will be probably a showstopper actually, I think.
So we're in the middle of Lawrence's time. So I'm going to pause and ask Lawrence what you want to do.
I think I can do something useful in a few minutes if I can get if I can share for a few minutes. So I'd like to go for it.
Okay. Are you able to take the ball?
Let me see if I can do that. I'm trying to share, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, looks like you're sharing. You're sharing something.
Is it? I can't tell what I'm sharing.
You're sharing your desktop, it looks like. We can see a browser with a list of issues.
Just the browser or the whole desktop?
There's multiple pages on the desktop.
Can you
maybe just just expand that window to cover everything.
All right. A little weird, but.
Just doing a time check, we only have 5 minutes left.
Understood. Okay, can you see that? This is just the open issues list for EAT. Can you see that in a clear way?
Yes.
Close enough.
Okay, so I've sorted out the open issues into kind of 3 categories. There's those that are new claims. So these are new claims that are not defined in the EAT document. Some of them are easy to add, like boot seat is probably easy to add. Some of them are to me, are going to be like months and months of work, like software inventory. Software inventory seems really important to me, particularly for Eric's use cases, and a lot of things people are expecting out of attestation. So what I'm kind of hoping is that the claims or the issues that are listed here are, when we finish all these issues, we finished EAT. That's kind of what I'm trying to have it set up for. So if there's a claim that you want and you don't see it listed in the EAT document or in the issues here, please say something in, file an issue or something like that. And maybe there's some claims in the Yang document that are not represented here. That would be cool to have them here. Then the other ones are issues that are I've marked ready to close. I don't know what we have in terms of closure policy on these things. A lot of them are ready to close because of the assumption that they were going to go in the architecture document. That seems a little open-ended today, so I'm probably not going to go close them for that reason. And then the other ones that don't have a label on them are issues that need some design, some work, some editing. I have not sorted them out as to like text editing versus engineering design. Because some of them are just text editing and some of them are engineering design. So I'm going to point out the UEID one here. Should UEIDs be larger than 128 bits? I'm going kind of racing through here. There's some comments back and forth. I have a pull request on this now with some analysis based on the birthday attack and stuff. So trying to get that to drive that to closure. Anyway, so generally, that's the where I'm trying to go with the issues. Trying to balance my time working on these issues and keeping them organized and commenting on architecture and use cases. But I'm trying to make this set of issues be, once we close all these issues, then the EAT document is done. I'm sure there's going to be new issues.
So call to action is for folks on the list. Call to action is review the set of issues. If you have issues you want to add, please contribute them and comment on the ones that are there. And at some point, it makes sense for the working group to consider each claim and approve or not approve the claims that are there. Is that?
Yeah, and particularly, I mean, I think one of the biggest actions is if you think about the claims that are necessary for use cases. I mean, I'm doing this too, but think about the claims that are necessary for use cases, and see if those claims are missing in the EAT document or in the issues list. So we're kind of have a scope of how many claims they're going to define and all that.
Okay. So we have 1 minute left. Let's take that 1 minute to briefly summarize next steps. Clearly, reading the drafts are important next steps. Participating in the issues for the EAT draft part of next steps. Are there other next steps we want to throw out?
Yeah, this is Hank. I would like to have a more concise proposal how to use the use case document as an architecture or how to merge them. Because I am not sure this will work. And Kathleen's proposal is somehow a little bit between the lines, I think. So Kathleen, maybe if you would be so kind and propose the way forward that you are envisioning and as an explicit extension to your first email, that would be, I think, something the list can read and parse better. Would that be okay?
Sure. I thought that was pretty clear, but I'll just send a quick summary, and Dave said he'd take a stab at it. So I think you'll get to see the example of that very soon anyway.
Yeah, I actually heard two things. You were going to sync up with Michael on what it would take. Dave also, and I would suggest you include Dave, is he also agreed after Kathleen's question, since he was going to contribute some text anyway, that he could contribute to that discussion.
Yeah, could we see, I guess I would personally like to see what Dave comes up with adding to Michael's document as a first step.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else
Guys,
for overtime?
Yeah. So we didn't quite cover, so I don't think we're quite ready to do the call for adoption on any of the drafts unless other people think otherwise. So we will ask that question again on, well, the architecture will be tabled, but the question goes to the information model and the Yang module drafts.
How about we set a goal of doing this at the face-to-face, and for some of us will be remote, but
yes.
You know, having the use case document a little further along, to have that as a possibility as well and see where we're at.
Okay, let's just make it an assertion, Kathleen. So by our face-to-face meeting, IETF 106, we want to be able to have the readiness for call for adoption on the Yang module, the interaction, and then have the discussion and decision on the use case and architecture drafts. Is that fair?
I think so, but I'm not one of the out there, so.
Well, it seems like I will be the lone person chairing, but you guys will be on the WebEx, so.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? We're going to call it. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.